Welcome to another bonus edition of Upon Further Review, and this is a playoff edition of Upon Further Review, as we have the division round of the playoffs starting this weekend. There's just 4 teams left in each conference, so it's a total of 8 teams overall. And we'll get started and talk about, in the AFC, the matchup between the Baltimore Ravens and the New England Patriots. And this matchup will be happening on Saturday, January 10th, and that will be at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can catch that on your local NBC affiliates. So the Ravens are coming in. They were a wild card. They were the last wild card, the 6th seed, and they ended up going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers last week in the wild card round. The Steelers were the number 3 seed, and both teams from the AFC North. The Steelers were the division champions, and the Ravens were able to do something that neither of those two teams had done during the regular season, and that was beat the other in their home stadium, because they had split the season series, the home team winning each game, until last week when the Ravens were able to win on the road in Pittsburgh and beat the Steelers to earn the chance to go to Foxborough to face the Patriots. The Patriots are the number 1 seed in the AFC. They have the best record in the AFC. They're the AFC East champions, and they had a record of 12-4 on the season. And they are hosting this game, and they had their bye week in round 1, as they got the Ravens coming in. And this is a rematch from a couple years ago, back when the Ravens ended up winning the Super Bowl. They had faced the Patriots in Foxborough on their way to winning everything eventually, and they're going to try to repeat that feat, although they're going to definitely have their work cut out for them. And for those of you familiar with the show, you know that we do the Madden highlights. That's what you've been watching while I've been talking here this whole time so far, as we were just getting started here. But these Madden highlights are gameplay that I did myself. I played the game out. I took the team that I believe is going to win this game, and that's the New England Patriots. So I'm playing as the Patriots. That's who I'm picking. If you saw the quick picks, then you already know that. But here on Upon Further Review, I'm going to break down the stats between these two teams over the season, and their numbers, break down their schedules, break down their individual stats, and also just give some analysis and my personal insight as to the keys to this game, the possibilities of either team coming out victorious, although I think the Patriots ultimately are going to win this game. But I'm not counting out the Ravens. They are definitely a tough team. It's going to be a very tough game for New England. I mean, the Ravens got a good defense, and they got a good running game. And Joe Flacco in the postseason, he turns it on. And when he's on, the guy can, definitely air it out and get some points on the scoreboard quick. So it's not going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination for New England. Lucky for them, they have the greatest coach of all time and the greatest quarterback of all time, with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. No discredit, or not to belittle Flacco and Harbaugh. John Harbaugh is an excellent coach, but Bill Belichick, he's on a whole nother level above the rest. And I mean, it's not only his titles with the Patriots, the Lombardi trophies he's won as the head coach, but if you actually take into account his time as defensive coordinator, he also has those rings from when he was in New York with the Giants. He was actually the architect behind that defense, with Lawrence Taylor leading the way. Is he actually, if I'm not mistaken, is the only guy who's won the defensive MVP in the last, 25, 30 years? Or even, has any other guy won the defensive MVP? I have to check that out. A good place to go, there's, of course, to check out the references, proreferences.com, or you can also check out ESPN. You can go follow their Twitter. They've got the stats. What is it? The freaking, drawing a little bit of a blank, but they're the ESPN stats that they do. And I follow them on Twitter. They are always tweeting out great information, and they have a pretty good, website as well. But right here, like I said, the Patriots, they got such a great team led by Tom Brady, but their defense is also playing really good, especially Darrelle Revis out there in the secondary. It was a great pickup. And as it is, Belichick is a defensive mastermind, and the Patriots, they get great production at all levels. They've got one of the best defensive players in the league who's not really been getting talked about a lot this season, although in seasons past, more so, he was getting the credit he is due. But, I mean, people still need to remember, Vince Wilfork is one of the best defensive players in the league, if not the best. And I said I'm not taking anything away from J.J. Watt, who obviously is going to be on the tips of anyone's tongue when they hear me say a statement such as that Vince Wilfork is the best. Hey, J.J. Watt. Yes, J.J. Watt's a great player, but that does not mean that Vince Wilfork is any less of a player. He is, in my opinion, the best defensive player, especially if you want to look at career-wise and longevity. When he's out on the field, it makes a tremendous difference. I mean, the guy can eat up 2 or 3 blockers. That frees up the linebackers coming on the blitz, and that allows them also to be able to get a pass rush without necessarily having to blitz. So, Big Daddy Vince is going to definitely be a huge factor in this game. Of course, the Ravens also got Hatoli Nada over there doing pretty much the same thing, and he's pretty dang close to being on that same level as Vince. But Vince, like Belichick, is just in a class by himself, which few ever get to. That's not to demean anyone below them in terms of success and talent and impact on a game, but some guys just are the best. That's just how it is. Anyway, getting a little bit into the whole commentary of it all, let's get back into the numbers. Let's rein this in a little, and let's go over the Ravens season. In 2014, they started off in week 1 going up against the Bengals, and that was in Baltimore. They lost that game, but they then went on a 3-game winning streak. First with the Thursday night win over Pittsburgh in Baltimore. Then they went on the road in week 3, and they beat the Browns in Cleveland. Then in week 4, they hosted the Panthers, who are going up against the Seahawks this weekend. So at that time, and most of the season, people say, whatever, they beat the Panthers. But they beat them by 28 points. And as we see now, they are in the playoffs. And that was actually when the Ravens beat the Panthers back in week 4, 38-10. That game right there, Flacco throwing for 327 yards. Steve Smith had a huge game, 239 yards. That game kind of changed the Panthers' season a little bit. Before that, they were, doing really good. They started off, I believe, 2-0. They lost the week before, but then that one right there put them at 500, and then that's when the Panthers went on their slide, really. Even though I guess you could trace it back to the week before, but taking that huge loss, they did bounce back and tie the Bengals in Cincinnati, but then they just kept losing, and as we saw, they finished under 500. But with the Ravens, in week 5, they actually did something similar. They went to Indianapolis and they lost to the Colts, who are going to be facing the Broncos. So you never know. Maybe those two teams somehow end up in a rematch in the championship. I don't think that's going to happen. I picked the Broncos and the Patriots, but you never know. But then in week 6, the Ravens ended up going to Tampa Bay, and they blew out the Bucs, and they got back on track with a win. And then in week 7, they ended up hosting the Falcons, and they beat them by 22 points, 29-7. Then in week 8, they ended up going to Cincinnati, and they lost a close game to the Bengals by just a field goal. And in week 9, in Pittsburgh, they just got destroyed by the Steelers. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Ben Roethlisberger actually put up 6 touchdowns in that game. And that's actually another thing. You're going to let up 6 touchdowns to Big Ben. Yes, the Steelers' defense is, or yes, the Ravens. The Ravens' defense is really good, but they are susceptible. You see how, like I said, Big Ben, 6 touchdowns. Right there, it kind of showed a weakness in their, like a chink in the armor. And then even in a couple weeks that we're going to get to here in a moment, you see what a couple other quarterbacks were able to find a way to put up points against this really good defense of the Ravens. But week 10, though, they ended up going to Tennessee. They beat them pretty easily. Even though Tennessee is better than people give them credit for. And they did have some struggles on offense against the Titans. But Forsett ran for over 100, and the Ravens defense held them to just 7. They then had their bye week. Then in week 12, they ended up going to New Orleans on Monday Night Football, and they beat the Saints in New Orleans. And even though the Saints had a losing record in New Orleans this year, they still did manage to beat the Packers down there. So beating the Saints in New Orleans is always, something that's impressive. Although they did allow 27 points. So again, you see Drew Brees was able to put up points against them. Flacco, though, and of course Justin Forsett, with a huge game, 182 yards rushing, was able to lift them past the Saints in that one. But then in week 13, they hosted the Chargers, and San Diego came in, was able to come from behind and beat them by 1 point. And again, you see Phillip Rivers, a really good quarterback, able to find a way to get into the end zone and lead his team back from down. They were trailing, and so Phillip Rivers brings them back. Of course, Forsett continues to run well right there against the Chargers. Third week in a row running for over 100 yards. They then ended up going to Miami in week 14. And although their defense played really well, Forsett actually was held to under 100 for the first time in 4 weeks. And then in week 15, they ended up hosting the Jaguars. They beat the Dolphins, which is definitely an impressive win. And then even regardless of what happened in the final week of the season with Miami has a good defense. They have a good team. They are going to be good next year. But week 15 against the Jaguars, that was in Baltimore. They beat them. But the Jaguars were able to hold Forsett to just 48 rushing yards in that game. So they had trouble against that Jacksonville defense, which is actually an underrated defense in itself. But then week 16, they ended up going to Houston. They lost that game. Speaking of J.J. Watt, right? And the Forsett only had 19 yards rushing in that one. So, in the end of the season there, in December, in the cold weather, he was having struggles to running the ball. Then week 17, though, they ended up hosting the Browns, and they ended up beating them down. Forsett got back over 100 yards in that game. And against the Cleveland defense that is also very underrated. So, that was actually impressive for him to bounce back in that final week of the season. And then, of course, last week in the wild card game, they ended up picking up the victory against Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh. Very impressive. Joe Flacco had a really good game, and Steve Smith as well. Forsett, though, only 40 yards rushing. And if that is the kind of production they're getting out of him, they're going to really have a very difficult time beating New England in Foxborough. But let's check out the Patriots season. And they had the bye week, of course, last week. But way back in September in week 1, they ended up going to Miami to start things off. And they actually lost by 2 possessions, 13 points, to the Dolphins. So right there you see the Patriots did lose in Miami. The Ravens were able to go down there and win. Week 2, the Patriots ended up going to Minnesota. And they beat the Vikings. But Brady didn't really have a big game, and all of a sudden everybody was talking, all this stuff about Brady, right? You were hearing murmurs. In week 3, the Patriots ended up hosting the Raiders. It was a very low-scoring affair, and it was definitely a defensive battle, and that's what lifted them to the victory in that game against an Oakland team that didn't win their first game until deep into the season. Then in week 4, the Patriots ended up going to Kansas City, and that was on Monday Night Football, a game that we really wouldn't even want to talk about, right? But it happened. We can talk about it now. There's been enough time. Time heals wounds. Brady was held to just 159 yards. Ridley only had 28 yards in that game, and they lost 41-14. And at that point, that was the final game of September. And all you heard the media talking was so much trash about Belichick and Brady being done and over. Oh, it's over. The dynasty's over. Oh, Brady needs to retire. A bunch of hogwash, a bunch of hype, a bunch of BS. If you go back, you can see what I had to say about it. And I said, in upon further review for the game that would follow, that Tom Brady and the Patriots would come back strong, and there was no way they were going to lose in Week 5 against the Bengals, even though the Bengals had that team. Everybody was talking about that they were the best, and they had been, undefeated throughout the first, month of the season. They were looking strong. But then Tom Brady and the Patriots came in, and the last thing you want to do is face the Patriots coming off a loss during the regular season, obviously, because you can't come off a loss in the playoffs. But in the regular season, if you catch the Patriots coming off a loss, you're guaranteed that you will lose, because the Patriots, man, I would have to go back and search very hard. I don't know if during the Brady-Belichick connection between the head coach and quarterback in their era as Patriots, ever since Brady took over from Drew Bledsoe, back when Bledsoe got injured, and then the Patriots went on to win their first Super Bowl. In that time, I don't believe, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. You have to look it up. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments below, and I'll even go double check. So someone's probably going to just troll me, say, oh, no, and force me to go check, right? I could check right now, but I don't want to, in the middle of the show, just stop. Oh, let me check this out. But because I'm so freaking sure anyway, that if it ever happened, it was like maybe once. But I don't think it's ever happened. They've never lost 2 games in a row. Never. And I knew they weren't done. What'd they do? They went on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 game winning streak. That's right. And they won 10 out of the next 11. That's what happened. I thought they were done. Oh, media, huh? All you people on the friggin' radio and on the TV that think you know it all, but are just real big hype machines. I mean, they do give some good information, and they got the stats, and I appreciate that, but they got to fill their 24-hour news cycle somehow, and so then they like to call for the end of the greatest quarterback ever to grace the football field, Tom Brady. And there's no doubt about that. He's going to solidify his legacy when he wins the Super Bowl this year. But as it were, in Week 5, the Patriots blew out the Bengals. Then in Week 6, they went to Buffalo. They beat a tough Buffalo team that has a great defense. One of the best defenses in the league. And Brady threw for 361 yards. What's up now? So then they went to then they hosted the Jets actually on Thursday Night Football. It was actually a close game. It always is against the Jets, and the Jets actually have a really good defense. Rex Ryan always puts up the good D, but he got fired anyway because you know why. I mean, we don't have to talk about that. We'll talk about it, and we'll go over the year in review for every team and keep an eye out for those. But Week 8. They ended up going to Chicago. They beat on the Bears pretty bad. Put up 51 points on them. Brady again, 354 yards this time. And so they showed out there. Of course, the Bears were trash in Soldier Field. They're pretty much trash, period, this year. So, but still, putting up 51 is always an impressive thing. And they definitely showed out the next week when the Broncos came to Foxborough, and they put up 43. Brady 333 yards. Thing about that, Broncos actually got a tremendous defense this year. Their defense is phenomenal. And to put up 43 points against the Broncos is just on a whole nother level of excellence for Tom Brady. Then they had their bye week. And then in Week 11, they went to Indianapolis and put up 42 points against the Colts. So look at that. In 3 weeks, they ended up scoring 51, 43, and 42. Well, 3 games, 4 weeks because they had the bye week. But that's just big numbers. Numbers that you don't really see from too many teams or too many quarterbacks. It's kind of stuff that you see maybe out in the Midwest, out in Green Bay. Week 12, they ended up hosting the Lions. And again, the best defense arguably in the league other than Seattle. And the Patriots put up 34 points against the Lions. I mean, you've seen what the Lions were doing last week against the Cowboys and how they held them. Patriots put up 10 more points than the Cowboys mustered. The Cowboys got a pretty good offense. I mean, DeMarco Murray, Tony Romo, Des Bryant, Jason Witten, they're nasty. But then in Week 13, speaking of Green Bay, that's where the Patriots went to face Aaron Rodgers and the Packers in Lambeau Field, and it was one of the best games of the year, even though the Patriots lost. And there was no, it's no disrespect. Like, there's no dishonor in losing in Green Bay to the Packers, especially in that game. It was a really good game. It came down the wire. 5-point game, 26-21. Could have went either way. And it was an awesome game. And we might end up seeing the rematch in the Super Bowl. It's possible. But I don't know. It's going to be tough for the Packers to beat the Seahawks in Seattle. And that'll be a rematch of Week 1. But getting back to the Patriots, in Week 14, they went to San Diego, bounced back after the loss with the win against the Chargers. That was the beginning of a 3-game winning streak to finish out before that loss to Buffalo. But they beat the Chargers. Then they ended up avenging their loss to the Dolphins with a win in Foxborough against Miami. Put up 41. Again, big numbers. Then in Week 16, going into New York, it was another tight game against the Jets. It always is. It was a low-scoring game. It was in the cold, you know. It was kind of, whatever. Week 17, they ended up going to Buffalo. They lost that game. But, hey, you know what? You know who the leading passer was? Garoppolo. And he only had 90 yards. Brady didn't even play the second half. So, I mean, not like as if Week 17 mattered. They'd already sewed up the number 1 seed. They had the bye week last week. And the Ravens, they played a tough game against Pittsburgh. And you cannot, factor that out. Playing that emotional game, and, emotions, energy, expanded, exhausted, and just all that, energy just at a peak. Emotions running high. To come out with that win in Pittsburgh, it takes a lot out of a team. And so then now, after that physical battle, they got to come into Foxborough to face the number 1 team in the AFC and in football, the Patriots, with the greatest quarterback of all time, Hall of Famer, to be Tom Brady. And the thing is Brady doesn't even have to have that good of a game for the Patriots to win. He could throw 212 yards. He doesn't even have to throw a touchdown. And they'll still win because they have a secret weapon that everyone has forgotten about. And his name is Jonas Gray. And even if they decide not to put Jonas in there as the feature back and get him the big yards, LeGarrette Blount can do it as well. And not to mention Shane Vereen. That's the thing, though. I believe that they've been holding Jonas Gray back for the playoffs. I almost am crazy enough to think that the whole thing with him being late for practice was manufactured. That they just were like, hey, don't come in, you'll be late. We won't let you play. We'll let everyone forget who you are. Because what good does it do us if he's putting up big numbers in the season? We're number 1 anyway. Got the number 1 seed. But if you have him go, just be on the sidelines, guy. Keep your legs fresh. And then, in the playoffs, maybe this week, maybe next week, maybe they wait until the Super Bowl. I almost feel like you don't want to wait because that's what I'm saying. Like, they'll just pull him out here. You can see in the gameplay, I got Jonas Gray in there. Because now in this tough game against a tough team like Baltimore, you got to pull it all out. And you got to bring out your secret weapon, Jonas Gray. You seen what he did before. You seen Jonas Gray when he came out and he had 201 yards, 4 touchdowns back against the Colts in Week 11. And that's kind of what I think is going to happen. I don't know if he's going to have such a huge game, but I kind of think they're going to bring him out and he's going to show out. But I could be wrong. Either way, though, they still got LeGarrette Blount. And I think LeGarrette Blount's one of the most underrated running backs in the NFL. I mean, the dude is prime time. He's the human highlight reel. This guy will hurdle over defenders. He'll plow right through them. He is nasty. All the way back to his days when he was a Duck in Oregon. So, Patriots with the running game. And then you got Tom Brady. And then you also have the greatest tight end in football today. Arguably ever, except he needs the longevity. You got other guys like, Antonio Gates, who's still doing his thing out in San Diego. He's had the longevity over his career where he, Gronk, if he can have that same longevity, then we'll be talking about Gronk is the greatest ever. He already is. I mean, that's the expectation because that's how good he is now. that there isn't another player on the field who can really defend Gronkowski. The linebackers aren't quick enough, and the safeties and corners that are going to be forced to try to tackle him aren't big enough. You got to gang tackle him. That's why the guys are always going low. That's the only thing. He's so big they go low, and you worry about, something happening. And that has happened in the past, which is a shame, but as I'll tell you what, you go up high on Gronk, you'll never get him down. But with those tools, plus not to mention Julian Edelman, Amendola, Brandon LaFell, the Patriots are loaded on offense. They can do it any which way. Belichick's a mastermind. They are going to find, going over the footage, they've had 2 weeks to prepare. They're going to be ready for him. And they've already, they've seen him before. It's not like as if we haven't seen the Ravens. Of course, they are a different team than they have been. But I think that the Ravens aren't necessarily, they were better before. Although Forsett is running really well. And their defense is young. They're quick. But, they don't have some of the veterans that they had in the past. Obviously, Ray Lewis and Ed Reed, are not there no more. They are getting good production out of their linebacking core. They still got Suggs. And they're getting some good production out of C.J. Mosley. As well as a couple other guys, They got a good defense, no doubt about that. Let's actually look at the numbers on offense and defense. Usually would already went over this, but when it comes to, we'll start with passing yards. This is what we always do. In passing proficiency, the Ravens are 13th in the NFL in passing yards per game. And the Patriots are 9th. So they both can pass the ball. They're both, right there. It's the Patriots 9, Ravens 13. Good passing teams. Of course, the passing defense, Patriots are 17th in yards allowed with their passing defense, and the Ravens are 23rd. So, as good as these teams are when it comes to passing the ball, their pass defenses are somewhat suspect. Of course, their run defenses are actually better. But let's look at their run offenses. And on offense, when it comes to rushing the ball, the Ravens are 8th in the NFL. And the Patriots, when it comes to running the ball, are 18th. So the Ravens got a much better running game, definitely on paper. And they've been getting huge production. They've actually been one of the better running teams. And they're 8th, but they've gotten up there at points where they were a top 5 running team. They kind of dropped down, like I said, to 8, still top 10. Forsett's been having a really good year, and they get some production out of Pierce and Taliaferro as well. So they can run the ball, no doubt about that. The thing is, the Patriots, although they're ranked 18th, they do have a running game, and they've had injuries in their backfield. Like Ridley got injured, that's when they ended up, bringing in a Blunt after Gray, the whole thing with him. And like I said, I don't really put much stock in that. I don't really believe that that's gonna necessarily keep them from having Jonas Gray get in there and tear things up in the postseason. But we shall see how that all develops. We won't know until it happens. That's the thing about that. And I'm just been waiting for the playoffs and for them to come back with Jonas Gray. When it comes to rushing defense, though, the Ravens are 4th in the NFL in yards allowed. So they shut it down. They do not allow yards. They only allow 88.2 yards per game on the ground with their defense. It's one of the best defenses in the league. Number 4. And the Patriots, though, they're number 9. Pretty darn good themselves. They're only allowing a $104.3. So they're a top 10 rushing defense. So 2 teams with good running defenses. Even though they both got pretty good running games. The Ravens, still, their strength is their running game. But they're going to have trouble, though, matching up against the Patriots' run defense. Same thing with the Patriots. Although their strength is more their passing game, they're going to have trouble running the ball. And they need to run the ball against the Ravens. So it'll be interesting to see how things go in the trenches. That's where it's going to be won and lost. So, I would give it to the Patriots when it comes to the passing game. But I give it to the Ravens on the ground, though. They definitely have a slight advantage, although I believe Jonas Gray can neutralize that and sway things in favor of New England. But then again, he might not even get on the field. You never know. That's the thing that's so crazy about that. But we shall see. It's just something I've been, thinking the whole time for months now. But let's look at the points scored. When it comes to points scored, the Ravens are 8th. So they put up 25.6 points per game. And that's pretty good. That's, one of the top offenses in the league. They're top 10. But the Patriots, they put up 29.2. That's almost 30 points a game that they average. They're 4th in the NFL, top 5 in scoring. And I'll tell you, there's some other teams that could score, but they're not in the playoffs. The Patriots can score, and they're the number 1 team. It's a deadly combination, along with their defense. But let's look at the points allowed. And when it comes to points allowed, the Ravens are 6th. They're only allowing 18.9. So it'll be interesting to see that Patriots offense against that Ravens defense, kind of like when a rock meets a hard place. What's going to happen? It's going to be some good football, some good playoff football that I just cannot wait to watch, as I'm sure all of you listening feel the same way, or else you wouldn't be listening. But alright, so the Patriots, when it comes to their defense, though, they are a top 10 defense. They are 8th in the league. They only allow 19.6 points per game. So when it comes to scoring, I got to give the advantage to the Patriots. With the way they put up so many points and they don't allow points, the Ravens are kind of like that too, but the Patriots are just a little bit better. They score more. And although they allow a little bit more, they only allow about a point more. It's pretty close. It's less than a point. It's 0.7. 18.9 versus 19.6. It's very negligible, the difference there. And their defenses. Their defenses are both tight. They both are basically teams that they don't allow teams to run on them. They're forcing teams to pass. They're forcing teams into 3rd and longs, and then forcing them to convert on 3rd down. And if you can't convert on 3rd down, well, you're going to have to punt the ball, or you're going to have to kick field goals. You're going to have a lot of trouble getting the end zone, and that's how the Ravens and the Patriots both keep the score low against other teams. They force them to either score with field goals, or they force teams to have to settle for only scoring on big plays. They might allow a big play here or there, but throughout the course of the game, they're going to be forcing teams to do a lot of punting. And don't be surprised to see a lot of action from the 2 punters in this game. Of course, at the same time, wouldn't be surprised if these 2 teams just start putting up points, because they could do that too. They both got arms. Like I said, Flacco can air it out, and that's the thing that's deadly about the Ravens, is that they're never out of it. Even in the final moments of a game, they could score really quick. Flacco, with his arm, he can air it out pretty much the length of the field. The guy can throw 60 yards no problem. He could throw it 80 yards if he has to. And that's actually going to be... The thing is, the Ravens are going to have a big game out of Forsett, and they got to have a big game out of Flacco if they're going to have any chance. And their defense is going to have to play the way they can play. They're capable of playing the way they've been playing all year. But they got to play 60 minutes of really strong, tight defense if they want to have a chance against the Patriots. The Patriots, when they come out in the first series, it's going to be interesting to see in the first, possessions on offense how much production both of these teams get, how many points. Because you already know that they're approaching this like the Super Bowl. They're going to have it scripted the first few series. And that's where the Patriots, if they can jump out to a quick and early lead, they should be able to ride that out and just keep, plugging away, keep, putting points on the board. The Ravens probably battle back and then make it close in the 2nd and 3rd quarters. But then in the 4th quarter, I think the Patriots will break it open. Maybe it's Jonas Gray who makes a big play. Maybe it's Gronkowski. Or maybe it's and some guy you're not expecting to have a big play, maybe like Timms or maybe Amendola, you never know, maybe Vereen, maybe Bolden. He just actually signed an extension with the Patriots, so did Patrick Chung. They already shored him up before free agency even hits to make sure those guys are happy. That's another thing that's making them, for a happy locker room there in New England. And they're determined, the Patriots even being the number 1 seed, because of the fact that everybody was pretty much calling them dead in the water early in the season, that's enough to put a chip on their shoulder. And when Brady has a chip on his shoulder, that's when he wins championships. The part of the thing is that they need to be the underdogs, and it's tough to be the underdogs when you win 3 Super Bowls. It was tough for them to be the underdogs when they went into the Super Bowl undefeated, and then that's when they lost. And yes, they are the number 1 seed, but like I said, I think that Brady can use that motivation from early on. I wouldn't be shocked if at nighttime before bed he's listening to tapes, the guys on ESPN and other, NFL Network as well. Both channels that are great and I freaking can't get enough of, but he's listening to those tapes from September, from October, early October before that Bengals game, right? That happened on the 5th. So those first few days of October, the last few days of September, when they were saying that he needed to retire. And he's going to be like, all right, let me show him what's up. And I believe that motivation is just going to give him that extra edge. And if you give Brady some bulletin board material, like I said, he's going to show out. He's going to have a big game. He's going to put up big numbers. Maybe not in this game, but watch next week against the Broncos. Of course, they got to get there first. Like I said, it's going to be a tough game against the Ravens. But it's going to, in my opinion, the Patriots should be able to take this one, although it should be a really good game, and it could come down to the wire. Like I said, I think the Patriots break it open in the 4th quarter, but I wouldn't be shocked to see this one come down to the final play. And they both had tremendous seasons. Just real quick, go over the numbers for the season stats individually, as we had promised earlier in the show. Joe Flacco, 3,986 passing yards and 27 touchdowns on the season, just 12 interceptions. Justin Forsett, 1,266 yards rushing and 8 touchdowns. Tremendous season for Forsett. He also had 263 yards receiving as well, although he did not catch any touchdowns. Steve Smith Sr. had 79 receptions for 1,065 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. So really a good year for him. Torrey Smith had 11 touchdowns and 767 receiving yards off of 49 receptions. And Owen Daniels, 48 receptions for 527 yards and 4 touchdowns. Their leading tackler was the rookie C.J. Mosley. He also led the team in interceptions with 2, but he had 133 tackles. So it's a huge year for the rookie. And that's a guy who's been hugely overlooked in the Rookie of the Year conversation. He's a huge part of why, they're having success, along with Terrell Suggs and Elvis Dumervil are also having big years. Elvis Dumervil, 17 sacks. Terrell Suggs, 12 sacks. So those guys are having pretty dang good years. And now let's look at the stats, the numbers for the New England Patriots. Tom Brady, 4,109 passing yards, 33 touchdowns, and just 9 interceptions. The leading rusher, what's his name? Jonas Gray. That's right, Jonas Gray is the Patriots' leading rusher on the season, although he only had 412 yards and 5 touchdowns, 4 of which came in one game. It was pretty much half of that was the 201, not half, a little less than half, 201 yards. There was actually an extra, 10 minutes or so of audio for this, but the crappy program I used to record it, as always, cut off part of the show at the end. Even though I gave it plenty of extra time, it still chopped it off. But enough about that. I went on anyway for about 40 minutes there, as is, and you definitely have a clear idea of what I think is going to happen in the game. Of course, it was in the process it cut me off when I was going over the stats, and I last was talking about Jonas Gray and about how half of his yards came in that game against Indianapolis when he had 201 yards and 4 touchdowns. And so let me just real quick, I'll give you the stats for Gronkowski was what I went over next. How Rob Gronkowski has 1,124 yards receiving on the season off of 82 receptions and 12 touchdowns. And also Julian Edelman was just shy of 1,000 yards with 972 yards and 4 touchdowns off of 92 receptions. And Brandon LaFell had 74 receptions for 953 yards and 7 touchdowns. So they definitely got some weapons, as I was actually saying before I got cut off there. In the lost audio, forever lost. But the leading tackler for the Patriots is Jamie Collins. He had 116 tackles and 4 sacks. He also was the leading interception. He had the leading interceptor, however you want to say it, but he led the team in interceptions. It was actually a 4-way tie between Jamie Collins, Devin McCourty, Logan Ryan, and Darrell Revis, of course, Revis Island. So no one player had a lot of interceptions, but interceptions are like that anyway. It doesn't necessarily have to do with who's the best defender, because if you're not getting interceptions, it might mean that you're not getting thrown at. You know, like Revis only has 2, but they're not really thrown at him, so it's not like he has a lot of opportunities to get picks. And also, when it comes to sacks, Rob Ninkovich led the Patriots with 8 sacks, and Dante Hightower had 6 sacks. So those were the top 2 in sack artist for New England. But yeah, as I said, I think the Patriots win this game. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. So I think they'll kind of like, it'll be a close game up until the 4th quarter, and that's where the Patriots will break it open. But it could come down to the final play. You never know. Let me know what you think. Do you think the Patriots win? Do you think the Ravens win? Leave a comment in the comment section below with your thoughts and opinions. Definitely looking forward to reading those, and I'll do my best to respond to them. And thank you very much for listening and watching the video. And if you enjoyed it, go ahead and hit the like button. If you want more content such as this, subscribe. And again, thank you for watching. It is appreciated. And I hope you're having a good day and have a great weekend and enjoy all the sports.